Clem Mitchell-Moore is taking his inquiry to 21 regional centres throughout New South Wales. By the end of this month, he's hoping to provide a detailed report to the Minister for Consumer Affairs on some of the problems facing farmers in their credit transactions. It all began after complaints were received about some credit providers. Clem Mitchell-Moore says the inquiry has heard from several farmers in the Maitland area, and their complaints about variations in interest rates and the lack of information about financial agreements have been similar to those elsewhere in the state.
The financial institutions lend probably every day to borrowers. Borrowers, on the other hand, Mark, they probably only enter into the transaction once a year, once every 2 years or once every 3 years. So that whilst there is an obligation on people who enter into commercial transactions to know what they're doing, nevertheless, there is an obligation on the institutions who are entering into these transactions much more frequently than the borrowers to ensure that everybody, both borrower and lender alike, get a fair go in any lending transaction.
Merewether-Carlton last played in a grand final in 1980. Two members of that side will take the field tomorrow for the club's first grade grand final challenge. Mayfield East, on the other hand, are making their third grand final appearance since 1984. Despite that, the Merewether-Carlton boys are confident they can overcome their apparent lack of recent grand final experience.
Big danger I see is that we don't start quickly enough. We have a big pack of forwards. We must hit the ground running. The first 10 minutes, if we can get to the breakdown quickly, I think that's where we can establish our superiority.
And of course a big crowd expected too, I guess.
I believe that there will be a big crowd. Carlton have traditionally had good support in Newcastle, so have May East. May East are fairly keen to win a grand final. They missed out a couple of years ago. Tomorrow might be their chance, so I think their supporters will come along. There'll be plenty of them.
And a prediction on the score?
I think we might win by 7 or 8.
With the number 2 sports ground in good condition, the near-capacity crowd expected for tomorrow's match should be treated to a fast and close game of grand final rugby union.
It was at yesterday's aggregate mine workers meeting at Branxton that the latest strike action was endorsed. By deciding to strike until at least the 15th of September, local miners paved the way for the possibility of a national stoppage being called on Tuesday next week. A key demand from union leaders yesterday was the call for a national coal marketing authority, an issue which General President of the Miners' Federation, John Maitland, says is no longer negotiable. But Prime Minister Hawke says the only jobs which would be created would be for bureaucrats, and that union leaders are deluding their members.
And the facts are, in regard to people who want to keep their jobs or minimise the possibility of loss of employment, is that they've got to tackle the question of the way in which the coal is produced. Now, people may not like the bluntness and the directness of those observations. Unfortunately, they are incontrovertibly true, and a grave disservice is being done to people employed in the coal industry by those who would delude them that by the establishment of a national marketing authority that jobs could be saved. The only jobs that would be created by that process would be for bureaucrats, not for coal miners.
The New South Wales Coal Association says the strike will cost more than $40 million in lost export income. With all the district's mines idle, there'll be a production loss of more than 1 million tonnes of coal, most of it bound for export.
The Cat Show, which is held in the lead up to the Matara Festival, this year attracted 300 entrants from across the region. Preened and bred for years to become part of the elite of the cat world, it was easy to see that they were quite unaffected by today's unrefined display of public attention. The breeds are many and varied, including some very rare and unusual types, the only criteria being that they are all above the common crowd. But of course, stardom doesn't come cheap, even to a cat. This morning, 10 judges examined each entrant for imperfections. And if that sounds demeaning, after lunch there were the hordes of cat admirers to entertain. Some decided it really wasn't worth all the effort and a judicious nap was in order. And if you were named Female Cat of the Year, like Adair My Valentine, posing for the cameras was going to be mandatory. Nevertheless, Val faced up to the pressure valiantly. Perhaps the greatest injury to a cat's pride, however, was the enormous stuffed dog at the back of the hall, the prize for the lucky raffle, showing that cat lovers can't be accused of discrimination.
$150 surfers from all over Australia gathered at Merewether Beach this weekend to battle it out for more than $6,500 worth of cash and prizes. The event is the second oldest surfing contest in Australia and drew competitors from as far away as Western Australia and Victoria. 50 surfers made it through the first 2 elimination rounds to come up against the top 8 seeded surfers. And although the seeded surfers came through victorious, they were certainly given a run for their money. The final saw 3 Queenslanders along with Narrabene's Brett Warner battling it out for number 1. In the end it was Jason Buttonshaw, the smallest in the final, who pulled off the best manoeuvres and came in first. Second went to Narrabene's Brett Warner and third and fourth place went to Queenslanders Craig Pitchers and Albie Ross. $150 surfers from all over Australia gathered at Merewether Beach this weekend to battle it out for more than $6,500 worth of cash and prizes. The event is the second oldest surfing contest in Australia and drew competitors from as far away as Western Australia and Victoria. 50 surfers made it through the first 2 elimination rounds to come up against the top 8 seeded surfers. And although the seeded surfers came through victorious, they were certainly given a run for their money.
Well, definitely the seeds so far have been the dominant surfers, and so they should be. They're seasoned competitors, but they didn't get through an easy run. There's a lot of local boys around here that have given them a good run for their money. Guys like Damien Idale, who's off to the World Cup in February. Another local junior surfer, Matthew Hoy, also given them a good run. And an underdog who hasn't really done much outside competing, Lee Holmes from surfing at Newcastle Beach, would probably been the best local result.
The final saw 3 Queenslanders along with Narrabene's Brett Warner battling it out for number 1. In the end it was Jason Buttonshaw, the smallest in the final, who pulled off the best manoeuvres and came in first. Second went to Narrabene's Brett Warner and third and fourth place went to Queenslanders Craig Pitchers and Albie Ross. According to Inspector Ray White, who heads up recruitment in the New South Wales Police Force, Newcastle has emerged as an ideal place to find new recruits. This week the force is launching its 3rd recruitment drive in 18 months. It has already managed to lure about 370 people from this area and this week hopes to significantly boost that number. He says it's not people on unemployment benefits who are the main converts. Apart from the usual school leavers, it's nurses and bank employees looking for a change of career who are signing up in droves. And the force is particularly now looking for women.
We'd really like to increase our numbers of females at the moment. We're trying to put about 25% of all our classes at the academy with a female content. We haven't been quite meeting that. Over the last 3 years we've been filling about 20% of the classes, but we'd like to even push it further to about 30%. We do get a lot of women from Newcastle and we'll be looking that way again.
Inspector White says people interested in applying are urged to contact the Newcastle Police Station early in the week so that the necessary medicals can be arranged. The death knell had sounded for the Richmond Vale Railway, which is the last commercial powered steam line left in Australia. As part of Coal and Allied's rationalisation program in the mining industry, all 18 employees who work on the line have received retrenchment notices. But the planned closure alarmed many people, particularly steam enthusiasts, and in response to that pressure, Coal and Allied has offered a last-minute reprieve. Already, talks have been held with officers from both the Newcastle and Cessnock City Councils to establish a trust. This would conduct a feasibility study to plan and administer the future operation of the railway for tourism purposes. The trust would be made up of representatives from Coal and Allied, the State Tourism Commission and the councils. In a bid to promote the trust's plan, the company will be looking for financial sponsorship for an annual steam day. Coal and Allied will meet with all the parties involved for more talks aimed at keeping one of Australia's oldest steam lines on the right track. Raymond Terrace in the black and white and Nelson Bay created a first when they ran onto Harker Oval yesterday to do battle for the Jim Houston Memorial Cup. Neither side were minor premiers. That honour went to Windale, but they were eliminated in the final series. Nelson Bay, defending champions going into yesterday's match, played hard and aggressive game from the outset. The Terrace scored first and that began a grand final winning points tally, the final score being Raymond Terrace 24 defeating Nelson Bay 12. In soccer, Adamstown Rosebuds in the red and green have been the form team of the 1987 competition, and yesterday at Adamstown Oval they showed the sort of play that's making them grand final favourites. In front of an enthusiastic crowd, Adamstown scored 3 goals, one each to Warren Davies and David Bock, with Gavin McDonald putting this one into the net late in the match to wrap up the game against Bell Swans 3-1.
When a small band of Allied fighter pilots overcame the onslaught of the German Luftwaffe in the skies above the English Channel, they changed the course of the Second World War. The photo exhibition commemorates their exploits and highlights some of the more famous pilots, men like Douglas Bader. The display also covers the history of the Royal Australian Air Force and even features some historical photographs from the early days of aviation in Newcastle, like the time this American DC-3 transport crashed at Broadmeadow in 1943, and the site of Newcastle's first airport, where the Broadmeadow Basketball Stadium now stands. Battle of Britain commemorative activities conclude on Friday with a special remembrance service at the Cenotaph in Civic Park and a flypast by FA-18 Hornet fighters. Meantime, to mark National Photo Week, the Newcastle members of the Australian Institute of Professional Photography are showing off some of their work, and the public is being asked to donate $1 to vote on which photos they think are the best. The money raised will go to the Royal Blind Society.
In the paintings of Pete Noost, it's an interest in light that permeates each and every one of his works. Perhaps it's not surprising that this artist, with his Dutch origins, should be heavily influenced by a master such as Rembrandt. But his love for soft, diffused light also shows the influence of Turner and Manet. The Noost landscapes are a mass of warm colours that evoke and capture the feeling of sunlight. They are the landscapes of Queensland and northern New South Wales, where Noost has settled. And the works are also characterised by a traditional oil glazing technique.
It's very unusual to see such emphasis placed on light. Mostly artists will use light to highlight some part of a preconceived underdrawing in a painting, but Pete Noost tends to concentrate on the light so that the landscape formation becomes almost coincidental.
While most people are familiar with the more spectacular festivities planned for next year, including the government's Tall Ships project and the independent First Fleet reenactment, that big birthday will also be marked at a grassroots level. Yesterday, young pioneers from Spears Point East Public School launched the Hunter Valley's regional program of events. The Education Department says highlights include next year's Newcastle show. It will take as its theme Australia's bicentenary, and the department will occupy a pavilion for massed exhibitions involving thousands of school children. The Australian Bicentennial exhibition will also visit Newcastle. Schools will organise excursions to inspect the fleet of trucks and their travelling displays. The Education Department also hopes schools will organise their own projects, and to this end, funding is available on a sliding scale depending on the number of children at each school.
I'm sure it's going to be a lot of fun. We're hoping it will be a lot of fun, but also we hope it will be a lot of valuable work and valuable experiences that will focus on the theme of living together.
David was selected in the two-man Australian team after winning both selection trials earlier this year. The pre-Olympics will be held offshore from Busan near Seoul, with as many as 70 of the world's best Division II sailboarders competing. It's been a busy time for the Morisset High student, who has been travelling to Terrigal as often as possible to train, as well as getting his schoolwork out of the way. Do you know much about the people you'll be competing against?
Not a great deal. It's first international event. There's 2 from each country, so it'll be the best in the world over there.
How are you feeling about it?
Getting a little bit nervous, but I think I'll enjoy it while I'm over there.
What about your schoolwork? You're going to be overseas all up for nearly a month. You taking your books with you?
Yeah, I've got a fair bit of study to catch up on, because it's been a rush the past 2 weeks with the trial exams and getting ready to go overseas and filling in job applications and everything. It's been a bit hectic.
David will put in a week of practice before the pre-Olympics begin to get used to conditions. On his way back from Seoul, it's straight to Airlie Beach in North Queensland for the National Championships. After that, it's home for 3 weeks of intensive study before sitting his HSC exams.
The first victim was Brian Walters of Patrick Street, Batteau Bay. After spinning a tale about a lost dog, the man forced his way into Mr. Walters' house.
I went round the back of the house and he pulled a knife in the courtyard and got me into the house and took the car keys and some money.
Mr. Walters says he was stabbed in the hand just before the man left his house. The intruder had become crazed because he could not get out through deadlocked doors. The intruder escaped with a car and some money. The next victim lived in nearby Murrumbidgee Crescent, Batteau Bay. After threatening a resident at knife point, he stole a white Sigma sedan. The attacker was quickly on the road again and drove to the Long Jetty Mall, where Surf and Sail became the next target.
I was behind the counter and thought, well, he's obviously mad. I'll get from behind the counter, which I did. And he pulled a knife and he said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I'm going to get some men to help you," thinking I'd had to get out, and at that stage he'd grabbed my bag from under the counter and I got angry. I didn't want him to take my bag with money, and I was screaming at him to give me the bag and to get out, and he was coming at me with the knife.
Fortunately, Ray Sutton from Ideal Showers heard Coral Fletcher's cries.
I said to him, "Hey, what do you think you're doing?" And all of a sudden he turned on me and went at me with the knife, and I saw him coming and he brushed the knife up towards my face, and I just happened to dodge it, and all of a sudden he started to push me past and ran past the door. Then he headed I grabbed the bag out of his hand as he ran, and as he ran I chased him across the main road and shot the bag at him and hit him on the head, and he fell down. I went over to deal with a bit more with him. Next minute he come at me with a knife and told me he was going to kill me.
By this time, police were hot on the trail and there was a high-speed chase through the Wyong Shire. The Sigma was abandoned at Tuggerah Parade Long Jetty and the man made off in a stolen green Holden wagon. The events climaxed at the Lakeside Plaza at the entrance. This stolen car was also abandoned. After a chase on foot, police apprehended a man. Late this afternoon, police were still trying to piece together today's events, but they say a man is almost certain to appear in the Wyong local court tomorrow morning on an array of charges, including malicious wounding and armed robbery.
In tonight's news, a report on the tragic death of a missionary from Newcastle who was killed in Sri Lanka. The minister lost his life in a terrorist ambush intended for someone else.
For all the news, join us tonight at 6.
Each year, about 2,200 Australian women die from breast cancer. That's about one person every 4 hours. And according to Dr. Laszlo Tabar, a visiting Swedish authority in the area, this mortality could be reduced by about half if a quality screening program based on X-rays was introduced. Already plans are afoot to set up a pilot program in the Hunter Valley, and according to Professor John Forbes of the Mater Hospital, they hope to have it up and running by January if state government funding comes through. Dr. Tabar is in Australia to take a course in mammography for radiologists and is also collaborating on the design of the Newcastle program. He says Newcastle is an obvious place for a pilot program.
This is an ideal place to start breast cancer screening. Here is the knowledge, very good facilities, and a very positive approach from the community.
Four lives were lost when violence flared near Jaffna on Monday night. Ironically, a ceasefire agreement between Tamil separatists and the Sri Lankan army had only recently been made. Rohan Tisanaka was on his way to a prayer meeting with 3 Sri Lankans when Tamil gunmen sprayed their van with bullets, killing them all.
But we have found out recently, since that took place, that they had really intended to shoot somebody else and not this particular van load of people, so it makes it a worse tragedy.
Rohan was a minister with the...
His close friend for the past 14 years, Pastor John Wolfenden, is in close contact with Rohan's 25-year-old wife Alison, formerly of Newcastle. She is still in Sri Lanka with their 2 children, Sonia, aged 6, and 4-year-old Nathan. Pastor Wolfenden says the tragic incident has claimed the life of an effervescent and dedicated man.
Well, he's irreplaceable. His personality is. The person that he is irreplaceable. We can place somebody else there, but we can never replace the man himself. You know, the work will go on, but the personality has left us. We've lost that.
Pastor Wolfenden says he will fly out on Friday and bring Rohan's family back to Newcastle.